Welcome to the Dark Chronicle. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and the time of day it is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to catch every chilling tale. Winter pressed hard against the border states in 1863, the kind of cold that settled into bone and memory alike. War had scarred the land so deeply that even the trees seemed exhausted, their branches stripped bare like wounded men. Along muddy roads and half-burned towns, a single image appeared again and again, nailed crookedly to posts, tavern doors, and courthouse walls. The paper was cheap, the ink already bleeding from damp air, but the promise written across it was enough to make men stop and stare. A bounty, not for a Confederate deserter, not for a thief, for a black man. The description was vague but threatening: tall, strong, runaway, armed, extremely dangerous. Alive preferred, dead acceptable. The number beneath those words turned heads. It was more than most men earned in a year. For some, it was salvation. For others, opportunity. For slave hunters, it was blood money, clean and familiar. They spoke of him as property already recovered, chains already imagined. They joked as they drank, boasting about how quickly they'd bring him in. None of them noticed how often the wind died when his name was spoken. None of them understood why veterans sitting quietly in corners would go silent, eyes lowered, hands tightening around tin cups. Far from those taverns, beyond the reach of roads and rumors, the man himself moved through a forest swallowed by fog. Spanish moss hung from branches like funeral veils, brushing his shoulders as he passed. His boots barely touched the ground. Each step was chosen, tested, remembered. The rifle rested easily against his body, not as a burden, but as an extension of himself. He had learned long ago that sound was a kind of betrayal. Silence, on the other hand, could save a life, or end one. He paused beside a shallow stream, crouching low, eyes scanning water and tree line alike. The moon was high, pale and watchful, its light broken by drifting clouds. He waited. Patience was not something he had learned in freedom. It had been carved into him long before, in fields where days stretched endlessly and nights were never fully safe. Back then, patience had meant survival. Now, it meant control. He had not always been a ghost. Years earlier, he had been just another man counted at dawn and dusk, measured in muscle and endurance. He had listened more than he spoke, watched more than he moved. Overseers mistook his quiet for obedience. That mistake had saved their lives more than once. When the war came, chaos cracked open doors long sealed shut. Gunfire rolled across the countryside, and in that thunder he disappeared north, guided by hands that trembled with fear but never turned him away. By the time he reached Union lines, he was thin, scarred, and already dangerous. They gave him a uniform that didn't quite fit, and a rifle older than most of the men carrying it. They tested him once, twice, then stopped counting. He didn't brag, he didn't celebrate. He simply did what the rifle asked of him. Distance meant nothing. Wind meant calculation. Fear meant focus. Officers wrote numbers in ledgers without names beside them. Confirmed kill, they'd mutter, shaking their heads. Impossible range. Word spread anyway. Confederate scouts spoke of a black marksman who struck after dusk, who fired once and vanished, who left no trail but bodies and dread. Fear laughed at first. Then patrols grew larger. Then they stopped singing on the march. Fear has a way of teaching lessons faster than discipline. The bounty posters came later. They were born from frustration, from officers desperate to stop bleeding men to an enemy they could not see. The slave hunters volunteered eagerly, convinced war had softened their prey. They knew how to track, they knew how to hurt, and they believed, truly believe. That a black man, no matter how skilled, would eventually make a mistake. The forest watched them enter. Branches snapped under careless boots. Horses snorted, unsettled. Lantern light bobbed through fog, turning trees into towering shadows. The hunters laughed loudly, telling crude jokes, promising each other drinks and women once the job was done. They followed signs they understood well: a footprint pressed into wet soil, ash from a fire burned clean, a place where reeds bent against the current. What they didn't see was how often those signs doubled back on themselves. How often they were being led. High above them, nestled into the natural curve of an ancient oak, the sniper lay still. His breath slowed until it matched the rhythm of the forest. He counted heartbeats the way others counted coins. Through the rifle's sights, the world narrowed to clarity. Faces glowed in lantern light, hands gestured. A leader rode at the front, confident, loud. The shot came like a thought completed. The man pitched backward from his saddle, lantern shattering, darkness swallowing his scream before it fully formed. Horses reared, men shouted, guns were raised and fired into nothing. Smoke thickened the air, blinding them further. By the time they realized what had happened, the shooter was already gone. He moved before panic could settle, sliding down the far side of the tree, disappearing into brush that seemed to part for him. He did not run. Running left tracks. He flowed, slow and deliberate, circling wide, listening. Fear sharpened men's voices. Anger made them sloppy. Another shot followed minutes later. Then another. Each bullet carried more than laid. It carried a message the hunters refused to hear. This was not a chase. It was a reckoning. As dawn crept closer, the survivors huddled together, backs pressed tight, eyes darting. The forest no longer felt like land. It felt like a living thing that had decided they did not belong. Somewhere beyond their sight, the sniper watched, unmoved by their fear, untouched by their hatred. He did not take joy in it. Joy had been burned out of him long ago. What remained was purpose. By morning, the bounty would still hang on walls. Men would still speak his description with greed in their mouths. But those who survived the night would add something new to the story. Their voices would shake, their eyes would refuse to meet others. And when asked what hunted them, they would struggle to answer. Because how do you explain that the man you sought to chain had become something else entirely? How do you admit that the hunted had learned the land, the war, and fear itself better than you ever could? As the sun rose pale and cold through the trees, the ghost sniper was already gone, leaving behind silence, bodies, and the beginning of a legend that would only grow darker with time. The survivors did not leave the forest when the sun rose. They couldn't. Fear rooted them deeper than mud ever could. Morning light filtered weakly through the fog, turning the world a dull grey, and with it came the awful clarity of what had happened. 2 bodies lay where they had fallen, eyes glassy, mouths frozen mid-sound. No sign of a struggle, no warning. Just death placed carefully, almost respectfully, as if even violence had rules here. The men spoke in whispers now. The leader's body had already cooled, his blood dark against the leaves. One hunter crossed himself again and again, lips trembling. Another swore under his breath that he'd heard footsteps during the night. Slow ones, deliberate, but no one admitted hearing the same. To do so would mean accepting the truth they were all circling. Someone had been among them the entire time, close enough to breathe the same air. They argued about retreat, about regrouping, about finishing the job quickly before Union patrols swept the area. Greed battled fear, and fear was winning. Still, the bounty lingered in their minds, heavy as a chain. They had lost men before. Hunting always carried risk. What unsettled them now was not the deaths. It was the precision, the silence, the sense that the shots had not been fired in haste or rage, but with patience, as if each man had been chosen. Far from their nervous circle, the sniper lay hidden in a shallow depression between roots and earth, his body half buried beneath leaves he had arranged hours earlier. Ants crawled across his sleeve. A bird landed nearby, cocked its head, then flew on. He remained motionless. Waiting was not something he did between actions. Waiting was the action. He replayed the night in his mind, not with emotion, but with adjustment. Wind speed, lantern glow, reaction time. The men had learned nothing yet, and that worried him. Panic made people dangerous. Panic made them unpredictable. He would need to end this before desperation pushed them into burning the forest or firing blindly in all directions. He shifted slowly, inch by inch, changing position as the sun climbed. Light was a double-edged thing. It revealed details but erased shadows. He needed both. When the hunters finally moved again, they did so clumsily. Formation broke. 2 men scouted ahead while the rest lagged behind, glancing over their shoulders every few steps. One laughed too loudly, forcing sound into the open air as if daring death to answer. The sniper marked him immediately, not out of anger, but because loud men tended to draw others close. He waited until the man stopped to relieve himself behind a fallen log. The shot was clean, quick. By the time the body slumped forward, the rifle was already being lowered. the sniper's weight shifting away. The scream came late, torn from another man's throat when he saw what remained. Chaos followed, shouting, wild gunfire, men tripping over one another as they scrambled for cover that did not exist. Smoke filled the clearing. Bullets chewed bark and dirt. Nothing answered back. That was when they realized something worse than being hunted. They were being studied. The men tried to retreat as a group, backs pressed together, moving toward higher ground where they believed visibility would save them. It didn't. The sniper had already moved ahead of them, using paths carved by deer and years of floodwater. He knew where the land rose, where roots formed natural steps, where sound carried and where it vanished. Another shot rang out, this one striking a man through the thigh. He screamed, collapsing, blood pooling fast. The sniper did not kill him immediately. Pain spread fear faster than death ever could. The group stalled, unsure whether to run or protect their wounded. That hesitation cost them 2 more lives. By midday, the forest had claimed most of them. The remaining hunters abandoned any pretense of control. They ran. Some dropped weapons. One fell to his knees, sobbing, promising God he'd never hunt again if only the shooting would stop. It didn't. Mercy was not part of the equation now. Not for men who sold others into chains. Not today. As the final shots echoed and faded, the forest returned to itself. Wind rustled leaves. Birds resumed their calls. The sniper emerged briefly from cover, checking the fallen with practiced distance. He did not linger. He never lingered. He took what he needed, ammunition, water, a coat, and vanished again. By nightfall, Union scouts found the aftermath. They had been following rumors, reports of missing men, of shots heard miles apart. What they discovered made even hardened soldiers uneasy. Bodies lay scattered, not randomly, but as if arranged by an unseen hand. No Union marks, no Confederate insignia, only slave hunter tools and empty eyes. An officer knelt beside one corpse, studying the wound. He had seen artillery, bayonets, mass death. This was different. This was intimate. One man, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Another soldier crossed himself. That's him, he whispered, the one they talk about. They searched, Ed for tracks and found none. Only impressions that led nowhere, broken twigs that pointed in opposing directions, signs that contradicted each other until even experienced scouts admitted defeat. Whatever path the sniper had taken, he had erased it. That night, around a Union campfire miles away, the man himself sat alone, rifle across his knees. He cleaned it carefully, methodically, as if the act itself grounded him. The firelight reflected faintly in his eyes, but there was no triumph there. Only fatigue. The war did not end because of what he had done. Slavery did not collapse in a day, he knew that. But every hunter who never returned was one less chain forged, one less life stolen back into darkness. That knowledge steadied him. Across the region, stories began to spread. Hunters spoke of a black Union sniper who could see through trees. Confederate soldiers warned each other not to light fires at night. Bounty posters were torn down, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a nervous glance into the woods. And somewhere between truth and terror, the legend sharpened its edges. They no longer called him a runaway. They called him Death that Walked. And as the war ground on, as blood-soaked fields and flags fell and rose again, the ghost sniper moved with it, unseen, unclaimed, and unstoppable, carrying the forest with him wherever he went. The stories traveled faster than armies now. They slipped along supply routes, hid in letters home, and rode in the mouths of men who swore they would never speak of it again, until night fell and silence pressed too hard. What had begun as rumor sharpened into warning. Confederate pickets refused to stand alone. Slave hunters, once so eager, suddenly demanded escorts or declined outright. Even Union officers, men hardened by years of slaughter, spoke his presence with a kind of uneasy respect. The man himself heard none of it. He moved east with the season, following the slow crawl of the war, staying just ahead of attention. The forest gave way to rolling hills, then broken farmland scarred by trenches and abandoned homes. Each place carried echoes, of boots, of screams, of prayers whispered into dirt. He listened to them all. Sound told him who had passed through, how long ago, and whether they had been afraid. Fear always left a mark. At a shallow ridge overlooking a crossroads used by Confederate scouts, he settled in before dusk. The ground here was dry and hard, but a cluster of rocks provided cover. He shaped the earth with his hands, clearing angles, memorizing distances. Wind moved differently at elevation. He accounted for it the way he always did. When darkness fell, he was already part of the landscape. As he waited, memory crept in, not as pain but as instruction. Before rifles and ranks, before Union blue and Confederate gray, there had been a different kind of battlefield, fields where the sun burned skin raw, nights broken by footsteps that never announced themselves. He had learned early how to watch without being seen, how to read moods, how to anticipate violence before it arrived. Survival had demanded it. When the rifle came into his hands, it felt less like a new skill and more like a language he already knew. A Confederate patrol approached the crossroads just after midnight. 6 men, careless, laughing softly, confident in the false safety of distance from the main lines. He let them pass the first marker, a dead tree split by lightning, then another. He waited until the lead rider paused to light a cigarette. The shot snapped through the quiet, sharp and final. The man dropped without sound, cigarette tumbling into dirt. The others froze, unsure whether to scatter or stand. That moment of hesitation was all he needed. 2 more fell before the survivors understood what hunted them. They fled, abandoning the road entirely. By dawn, Union infantry advanced without resistance, finding the route clear, enemy scouts gone. An officer marked the success in his report without knowing why the enemy had vanished. The sniper watched from afar, already moving on. This was how the war worked for him. Invisible actions, visible results. He did not need recognition. He did not want it. Attention brought questions, and questions brought chains of another kind. But attention found him anyway. A Union captain sought him out weeks later, following a trail of improbable reports and impossible distances. He found the sniper cleaning his rifle beside a river, movements calm, eyes alert. The captain hesitated before speaking, unsure whether interrupting would be a mistake. "They say you're the reason the hunters stopped coming," the officer said carefully. The man did not look up. "They'll come again." The captain nodded, unsettled by the certainty in that answer. "Command wants to know if you'll take assignments, specific ones." The sniper considered this. He had never refused a target that mattered. He had also never trusted promises. "I don't stay in camps," he said at last. "I don't wear ranks." "That's acceptable," the captain replied quickly. "They just want results." A pause stretched between them, filled by the sound of water moving over stone. Finally, the sniper stood. "Then point me where I'm needed." From that day on, the war bent slightly around him. He struck supply lines before dawn, dismantled artillery crews before the first shell could fire, erased officers whose confidence held men together. Each action was surgical, each retreat seamless. Confederate commanders grew paranoid, relocating camps constantly, issuing contradictory orders. Men slept less, tempers flared, mistakes multiplied, and beneath it all ran a quieter terror. He was black. That fact unsettled them more than any tally of dead. It cracked something foundational, something they had built their world upon. A man they believed born to be owned had mastered distance, discipline, and death better than they ever could. They could not reconcile it, so they mythologized him instead, turned him into a demon, a specter, something unnatural enough to excuse their fear. The bounty rose again. New posters appeared, larger numbers scrawled beneath the same vague description. This time, Confederate officers encouraged the hunt. They promised protection, backup, prestige. Some men believed them, others did not, but hunger and desperation have a way of drowning caution. One group took the bait near a ruined church on the edge of contested land. The sniper observed them from the bell tower's shadow, watching as they argued about routes and pay. They were better armed than the last group, quieter too. That worried him more than bravado ever had. These men had learned something from the dead. He waited until night fell fully, until the moon vanished behind cloud. Then he moved. The first shot shattered a kneecap. The second killed a man who tried to drag the wounded away. The rest scattered, returning fire blindly. Bullets tore into stone and wood, but none came close. He was already elsewhere, breath controlled, position changed. They regrouped inside the church, barricading doors, praying aloud between curses. Firelight flickered through broken windows. He circled them slowly, counting steps, listening to panic rise and fall like tidewater. When one man finally bolted for the rear exit, the sniper ended it with a single shot through the chest. Silence followed, heavy, final. He did not enter the church. He did not need to. By morning, Union cavalry would pass through and find what remained. Another story would begin its journey through the ranks. Later, alone, he washed his hands in a stream, watching dark water carry away blood that was not his. He thought of the men he had killed, not as individuals but as consequences. Each death shifted the balance slightly. Each absence meant someone else might sleep unchained. Still, the weight accumulated. At night, when he allowed himself rest, dreams came unbidden. Fields, whips, names shouted that no longer belonged to him. He woke before they could take hold, reaching instinctively for the rifle. Only when his fingers touched wood and steel did his breathing slow. He wondered sometimes what would remain of him when the war ended. Freedom was a word spoken easily but lived with difficulty. He had shaped himself to this conflict, honed every instinct toward it. When the killing stopped, what then? The thought passed as quickly as it came. Survival had taught him never to plan too far ahead. For now there were still roads to clear, hunters to stop, fear to turn back on itself. The war still needed a ghost. And as long as chains existed, he would answer that need, unseen, unthanked, and unwavering. Somewhere, another poster waited to be nailed into place. Somewhere else, a forest already knew how the story would end. The ruined town lay in a shallow basin where two dirt roads crossed, its broken buildings sagging like old men too tired to stand. Fire had taken it once already. Chimneys blackened, roofs collapsed inward, windows staring out as empty sockets. Smoke still clung faintly to the air, not from flames but from memory. It was here that the hunters believed they could finally force the war's ghost into the open. They came in numbers this time. Not the careless men driven only by bounty, but a mixed group. Slave hunters reinforced by Confederate irregulars. Men who knew terrain and tactics. Men who had listened to rumors and adjusted accordingly. They moved slowly, communicating with hand signals, spreading out to cover angles. No lanterns, no loud voices. The town was surrounded before dusk finished bleeding out of the sky. From the upper floor of a half-collapsed storehouse, the sniper watched them arrive. He had been there since morning, memorizing lines of sight through broken walls, testing floorboards for sound, mapping escape routes through alleys choked with debris. He knew the town would draw them eventually. Fear always wanted something solid to cling to, a place where the enemy must be, a place that could be searched, burned, controlled. They were wrong. As night settled, the men took positions inside buildings, believing stone and timber would shield them. Fires were lit carefully, hidden from outside view. A commander whispered orders, confident in his preparation. He had studied reports. He had convinced himself that discipline would defeat superstition. The sniper adjusted his rifle and waited. The first kill came long after full dark, when confidence had settled and vigilance dulled just enough. A man stepped into the street to relieve himself, believing the silence meant safety. The bullet struck him cleanly through the temple. He dropped without a sound, body folding like discarded cloth. The reaction was immediate but confused. Shouts. Men rushing to windows. Someone fired blindly into the dark. The sniper was already moving, descending through a hole in the floor, slipping into an alley that smelled of damp earth and ash. He counted breaths, then circled wide. Another shot. This one from ground level. A man fell from a second-story window, blood spraying the wall behind him. Panic spread now, sharp and contagious. Orders were shouted and contradicted. Men fired at shadows. Bullets chipped stone and wood, tearing at ghosts. The sniper moved again. He used the town the way others used cover in battle, fluidly, instinctively. He passed through doorways without sound, stepped over glass where boots would crunch, climbed broken staircases that others avoided. He did not rush. Speed came from efficiency, not haste. One hunter tried to rally the men, shouting that the shooter had to be somewhere specific, that there were only so many places to hide. He lasted less than a minute. The bullet struck him through the throat, cutting words short, leaving only a wet gasp and widening eyes. Fear took control after that. Men barricaded themselves inside build. Ings, backs to walls, guns shaking in their hands. They whispered prayers and curses, begging God and daring the devil in the same breath. Some promised they would never hunt again. Some screamed for reinforcements that would never come. The sniper listened. He could hear heartbeats in their breathing, could tell who was closest to breaking, who might run. He chose his moments carefully. Another shot shattered a kneecap. The scream echoed through the town, drawing men toward it despite themselves. 2 more fell when they tried to drag the wounded away. The night stretched, heavy and endless. By the time the moon reached its highest point, the town belonged to him. He did not kill everyone. He never did. Death was a message, not a flood. Those who survived would carry it farther than any bullet could. One man was allowed to flee, sent running down the road with terror pushing him faster than any horse. The sniper watched him disappear into darkness, knowing the story he would tell would do more damage than another corpse. When dawn came, pale and cold, the town revealed what the night had hidden. Bodies lay in streets and doorways, positions marking panic rather than strategy. No sign of struggle beyond the wounds themselves, no clear indication of where the shots had come from. Union cavalry arrived hours later, drawn by reports of gunfire and smoke. What they found unsettled even them. An officer dismounted slowly, scanning rooftops and alleys. "One man," he said quietly, echoing words spoken elsewhere before. "One man did all this." They searched, but as always, there was nothing to find. No tracks, no shell casings left behind, no sign of direction. The sniper was already miles away, moving along a creek bed, boots wet, mind calm. As he walked, exhaustion pressed in. Not physical. His body had learned to endure that, but something deeper. Each fight demanded more calculation, more care. The hunters were learning. They were adapting. Soon numbers and fire would overwhelm even the most careful movement. He needed to change the rhythm. Instead of reacting to bounties, he began shaping them. He let word spread of where he might be, planting signs that drew hunters into places of his choosing, ravines, swamps, narrow passes where numbers meant nothing. He became less a man and more a force, something that bent the behavior of others simply by existing. Confederate command grew desperate. Orders were issued to avoid certain regions entirely. Supply routes were rerouted at great cost. Officers blamed each other for losses they could not explain. The war slowed in places, stalled by fear of an enemy who did not march or camp or raise flags. Union officers noticed the difference. They didn't question it too closely. One night, camped far from the front, the sniper sat beside a low fire, keeping it small enough to hide from a distance. He cleaned his rifle by feel, hands moving without thought. Around him, the woods murmured softly, alive and indifferent. He thought again of the war's end. Rumors said it was coming. Victories stacked slowly in Union favor. Slavery's grip was weakening, though it still thrashed violently. Freedom hovered on the horizon like a shape seen through fog, real but not yet reachable. He wondered if there would be room for him in that world. A man shaped by shadows, by silence and death, did not fit easily into daylight. He had traded one kind of bondage for another, though this one he had chosen. Purpose was a chain too, but it was lighter than the one he had worn before. The thought did not trouble him long. Movement stirred in the distance, too careful to be animals, too slow to be coincidence. He extinguished the fire and faded back into the dark, rifle ready, senses sharpening. The hunters had not given up, they never did. And as long as they came, as long as chains were still forged and sold, the ghost would answer, not with speeches, not with banners, but with the quiet certainty, oh, a shot fired from nowhere, reminding the world that the hunted could become something far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The man who ran from the ruined town did not stop until his lungs burned raw and his legs threatened to fold beneath him. He burst from the tree line at dawn, face streaked with soot and tears, babbling to the first Confederate patrol he encountered. His words tumbled over one another, shots from nowhere, men dropping like sacks, a black sniper who moved through walls. The soldiers listened with tight expressions, exchanging looks that said they had heard this before, just never from someone who had survived it. Within days, the story had spread beyond rumor into policy. Orders came down quietly, passed from officer to officer without ceremony. Certain roads were to be avoided, night patrols were doubled, then halved, then cancelled altogether. Fires were banned after dusk. Men were instructed to sleep in pairs, backs together, rifles loaded. The war, already a thing of constant dread, acquired a new layer. one that crept into dreams and turned shadows into threats. The sniper felt the change almost immediately. He sensed it in the absence of movement where there should have been scouts, in the way supply wagons altered routes, in the sudden quiet of places once busy with soldiers. Fear leaves gaps. He learned to read those gaps the way others read maps. Where there was nothing, something had shifted. Union command took notice too, though they never said his name. Reports came in of Confederate withdrawals without engagement, of roads left unguarded, of artillery abandoned intact. An entire flank went soft in a matter of weeks, not because of defeat in battle, but because men refused to stand where they believed death watched from the trees. An officer, exhausted and blunt, remarked that it was as if the enemy was fighting a ghost. No one corrected him. The sniper did not slow. If anything, he became more careful. He understood now that he was no longer just a rifle in the dark. He was an idea. Ideas attracted attention, and attention brought traps. He avoided repetition, never striking the same way twice, never letting patterns settle. One night he fired from high ground, the next from water level. Sometimes he didn't fire at all, allowing fear to do the work for him. Still, danger found him. Near a stretch of marshland riddled with narrow causeways, he sensed it, a wrongness in the quiet, a stillness that felt forced. Birds were absent, insects too. He froze mid-step, weight balanced, breath held. Something moved against the wind. The trap sprang a heartbeat later. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets tearing through reeds and mud where he had been seconds before. He dove, rolling into water that swallowed sound and shape. The cold bit hard, stealing breath, but he forced himself still, sinking beneath the surface as more shots cracked overhead. They had learned. Men moved cautiously now, spreading out, calling to one another in low voices. Dogs barked, straining at leashes. The sniper stayed submerged until his chest screamed for air, then rose slowly, nose breaking the surface among reeds. He watched boots pass within feet of him, mud sloughing off soles into the water. Patience saved him again. When the search widened and discipline slipped, he moved, not away but through. A shot rang out behind them, dropped from a distance they hadn't accounted for. Shouting followed. Confusion. He took advantage of it, slipping past the cordon, leaving them firing at each other's fear. That night, safe at last, he trembled, not from cold, but from the closeness of it. He cleaned his rifle by lantern light, hands steady despite what might have been. He understood now that survival would demand more than skill. It would demand restraint. For the first time since the war had reshaped him, he chose not to pull the trigger when he could have. Weeks later, Union cavalry intercept. Ted, a Confederate messenger carrying orders specifically about him. The document listed warnings, countermeasures, exaggerated descriptions of his abilities. It recommended artillery sweeps of suspected forests, scorched earth if necessary. An officer read it twice, then folded it carefully, as if the paper itself might bite. "They're afraid," he said quietly. The sniper listened from the edge of the camp, unseen. Fear had been his ally, but fear was changing into something uglier. Desperation. Men who feared ghosts would burn the world to rid themselves of one. He adjusted his course after that, guiding hunters and patrols away from towns and farms, drawing them instead into places already ruined. Old battlefields, swamps where nothing grew, stretches of land no one would miss. If the land had to suffer, let it be land already broken by war. His actions did not go unnoticed. A Union general requested to meet him. The request came not as an order, but as an invitation, delivered by a courier who looked both awed and afraid. The meeting took place at dusk, away from camp, beneath a stand of trees scarred by old bullets. "You've done more than we asked," the general said, studying him with open curiosity. "More than we can officially acknowledge." The sniper said nothing. "There will be a day soon," the general continued, "when this war ends. When it does, men like you will be inconvenient." The word landed heavily. "I can arrange papers," the general offered. "Protection. A place far from here." The sniper finally spoke. "I don't need protection." The general nodded slowly. "No, I suppose you don't." They parted without promises. As autumn crept in, the war's tempo shifted. Battles grew larger, louder. Cannons thundered where rifles once whispered. The sniper found fewer places where his particular skills could shape the field. Still, there were moments. an officer who needed removing, a patrol that threatened freed families moving north. He took those moments and left the rest to the armies. At night, he dreamed less of fields and more of quiet roads leading nowhere in particular. Dreams of walking without watching every shadow. Dreams of a rifle laid aside. One evening, he encountered a group of freed men and women moving under Union escort, eyes wide, clutching what little they carried. A child stared at him openly, unafraid, curiosity outweighing caution. The sniper met the child's gaze and felt something loosen inside his chest. This was why. Not revenge. Not legend. This, when winter returned, harsher than before, he found himself alone more often, the war roaring elsewhere. The bounty posters stopped appearing, not because they had succeeded, but because no one would answer them. His name, if he ever had one, faded into something less precise, more powerful, a ghost. As the year drew toward its end, he stood on a ridge overlooking a valley filled with Union camps, fires glowing like fallen stars. The war would end soon. He could feel it in the way men talked, in the cautious hope threading through exhaustion. He turned away from the light and walked into the dark, not fleeing it but choosing it one last time, because when the war ended, the ghost would need to disappear, and he intended to decide how. The war did not end with a single sound. It unraveled. Rumors came first, whispered certainty carried by messengers who smiled despite themselves. Then came pauses where battles should have been, stretches of land left strangely untouched. Men spoke of surrender in careful tones, as if saying the word too loudly might undo it. By the time official confirmation arrived, exhaustion outweighed celebration. Soldiers sat where they were and let the knowledge settle into their bones. For the ghost, the ending felt quieter than he expected. He watched from a ridge as Union flags were raised over towns that had burned twice already. He listened as cannon fire ceased, replaced by shouts and sobbing and laugh. They're all tangled together. Men embraced. Some dropped to their knees. Others stared into nothing, unable to imagine a world without killing. He did not join them. Victory had never belonged to him in the same way. The war had been a necessity, not a cause. A storm he learned to move within, not a banner he marched under. As camps began to break apart and men spoke of home, he turned away from the roads and followed water south, then west, then nowhere in particular. Freedom arrived unevenly. In some places, chains were struck off with ceremony. In others, they were replaced by threats and laws written with different ink. He heard stories as he moved, of freedmen beaten for standing too tall, of hunters who traded whips for badges. The war had ended, but fear had not been defeated. It had only changed uniforms. That knowledge hardened his resolve. He dismantled himself carefully. First went the patterns. No more moving at dusk, no more high ground, no more watching camps from tree lines. Then the habits, counting steps, marking wind, sleeping in fragments. He forced himself to walk roads in daylight, to accept noise, to let people see him. It felt dangerous in a way gunfire never had. He buried the rifle near a stand of oaks beside a slow river, wrapping it in oilcloth, pressing earth down firm with his hands. When he stood, he did not look back. If he did, he feared he would never leave. Weeks passed. Then months. He took work where he could, hauling, repairing, clearing land ruined by armies. He gave a name when asked, one he chose rather than inherited. People accepted it easily. They always did. The world preferred simple answers. But ghosts linger. Sometimes, late at night, he would wake with his heart racing, fingers curling as if still wrapped around wood and steel. Sometimes he would hear a crack in the distance, a branch, a door, and feel the old focus snap into place before he could stop it. He learned to breathe through those moments, to let them pass without acting. Not everyone let the past stay buried. One evening, while resting near a small settlement, he overheard men talking by firelight. They spoke of a sniper from the war, a black man who haunted forests and towns, who punished hunters and vanished. The story had grown teeth. In this version he could not be killed. In another he had never been real at all. The man listened quietly, face unreadable. "You hear he shot a man through fog at a mile?" One said. "Don't matter," another replied. "War's over. Ghosts don't mean much now." The words stayed with him. Ghosts mattered because people believed in them, because fear shaped behavior long after the source was gone. He wondered what his legend would do in this new world. Would it protect, warning men away from cruelty, or would it become another excuse for violence, another shadow blamed for human choices? He decided then that the story needed an ending, not a death, a disappearance. In the spring he traveled back toward land he knew, the edge of the great forest where so many hunters had learned to fear silence. He moved openly this time, letting himself be seen. Word spread quickly. It always did. Men whispered that the ghost had returned. A small group followed him into the trees. They were not slave hunters, not exactly. They carried authority now. Badges, papers, the thin smile of men who believed the law belonged to them. They demanded answers, demanded obedience. When he refused, they reached for weapons. He did not run. He stood still and let them see him clearly, older now. Lines etched by years of vigilance, eyes calm. Not a monster, not a myth, just a man who had survived. Go home, he told them. This ends here. They laughed. Fear and pride mixed poorly. When one raised his rifle, the man moved, not to attack, but to vanish. He stepped backward into the trees, then sideways, then was simply gone. No shots followed, no bodies fell. The forest swallowed him the way it always ha. D. The men fired anyway, wild and useless, then fled. By morning the story had changed. Some said the ghost spared them. Some said he dissolved into mist. Some said he had finally found peace. No one could agree, and that uncertainty dulled the legend's edge. Fear needs clarity to grow. He left the region that day, not hurried, not hunted. Years passed. He lived quietly, far from battlefields and forests thick with memory. He built things instead of ending them. When asked about the war, he spoke little, and when he did, he spoke of loss rather than glory. Children listened, sensing there was more beneath his words, but never pressing. On rare nights when the world felt too still, he would walk to the edge of town and listen to the wind. It sounded different now, less like warning, more like distance. He liked that, somewhere, bounty posters rotted away in forgotten places. Rifles rusted, hunters aged into stories told badly by grandchildren. The ghost became less sharp, more symbolic, a cautionary tale, a whisper of justice from a darker time, and the man who had once been hunted, who had learned to hunt back, lived on not as death in the trees, but as proof that survival itself could be an act of defiance. History would never know his name, but it would remember the silence he left behind,